So we'll go to diversity and cultural variation in human behavior. So first, what is diversity? Diversity implies to a situation where there is difference. There's differences in diversity. So when we talk about cultural diversity, it means that it refers to a wide difference between human culture. That means, oh, your culture is meant for my culture, their culture is meant for our culture. So because we have differences in human culture, we call it cultural diversity. I think the point is clear.
Yeah.
Then we go on. So here I go. Different societies around the world develop different cultures. So what are the ways in which we develop different cultures? We can develop culture through trading, by buying from and selling from each other.
Okay.
Trading, that means we can develop culture. Two, marrying people of other societies. That means you get married to, or maybe a Korean, you have to start practicing Korean culture. So we can also have cultural diversity through marriage.
Yes.
So therefore, the increased contact between people means that people around the world now have more knowledge of other cultures. So because there is increasing contacts, like people get to know each other virtually every day around the world, it means we start getting ourselves exposed to different cultures of different people. So this brings about the cultural diversity we're talking about here. So now we are going to cultural variances. So for cultural variance, I wrote here, areas of cultural variance. Human cultures are very diverse. What is considered as normal in one culture may be considered strange, deviant, or offensive in another. So there's cultural variance. That means our culture differs. So for the fact that our culture differs, so some things that happens in your culture, if it happens in my culture, people might like, no, this is deviance, or this is an offense. We don't accept this.
Yes.
That is what we have to understand, and we have to respect that culture are differences. So what are those differences in culture that we're talking about? One, language. What we speak. My language is different from your language. Yes. Though we have a common language right now, which is English, but you have your own dialect, I have my own.
Yes.
So that's variance in culture.
Yeah.
Norms of dress and appearance. The way you dress, the way I dress is different. So you have your own ways, you have your cultural way of dressing. Nigerians have their own. So there's cultural variance in dressing too. The third one is about the food and drink.
Yeah.
What we eat, it's different. So the things you drink, the things you eat are different from the things I drink, the things I eat. Though we might have common things, but most of what we eat are different. So that's the cultural variance too.
Yeah.
They'll go on to traditions such as festivals and rituals.
Yeah.
So we have different traditions, different festivals. So there's cultural variance. And the last one is about ideas about morality. What is moral? The principle to know what is right or wrong. So we have different ideas about morality. Yeah. So what you think is right might be wrong on my own side. What I think is right on my own side, you might see it as being wrong. So there's different ideas about morality. Yeah. So these are different reasons why there's cultural variation in human. I think it's clear.
Yeah.
So we start with each one at a time. We have cultural variation in food.
Yeah.
So for cultural variation in food, so here I wrote, as cultures have different ideas about what people should or shouldn't eat, such as insects and animals, such as dogs and monkeys. So for cultural variation in food, we're talking about what people should eat and what they shouldn't eat. So each culture has their own ways, what they should and what they shouldn't. So all the main world religions have some followers who keep the dietary rules. For example, Muslims do not eat pork.
Yeah.
So Muslims do not eat pork. That is the culture. So even religion states what we can and what we cannot. The third one, meat and fish are usually cooked before eating, but there are some countries who eat raw meat, such as Japan. Yeah. So it's also cultural variation about food. I think that's clear. Yes. We are talking about each one now. So I wrote again, there are all cultural variations in meal times and in who should eat with whom. For example, men and women may eat separately. So it's still cultural variation. In some culture, men and women might not be able to eat together. Other cultures, they might not see it as anything, as a big deal. So it depends. Then we have the last one here, Western cultures. Western cultures tend to avoid eating with hands and use cutlery. Yeah. So the Westerners, they eat with cutlery, not with the hand. So that's also food variation in terms of culture. I think the point is clear. So we go to cultural relativism. So for cultural relativism, are you there?
Yeah.
So I go, this is the act of considering all cultures on their own terms, rather than from a Western point of view. So this means that you are not judging culture as an outsider, but on its own merits. So what I'm saying is we call it cultural relativism because you respect other people's culture. So you're not going to judge my culture on your own term. You judge my culture based on the merits my culture brings. Do you get the point here? You don't judge my culture based on your own subjective opinion. You judge my culture based on the merits of my culture.
Yeah.
So that's what we call cultural relativism.
Yes.
So that's why I go, this is the act of considering all cultures on their own terms, rather than from a Western point of view, rather than from the point of view of maybe the Westerners. Oh, it's the Libyan culture. Yes, it's the Libyan culture. You judge it based on the Libyan environment. You don't judge it based on what America will say about it or what Europeans will say about it. No. So for the fact that you're not doing that, we call it cultural relativism. Is it clear?
Yes.
That takes us to multiculturalism. So for multiculturalism, I go, it is a system where there are many cultures which exist alongside each other. So there's multiculturalism. Like in Libya, we have the Nigerian culture, we have the Libyan culture. These cultures are existing too because we are here. So we have our culture, we might practice and respect Libyan culture, but we still have our own culture. So because we have our own culture alongside the Libyan culture, we call it multiculturalism.
Yes.
Is it clear?
Yes.
So we have a multicultural society. Why do we call them multicultural society? We call them multicultural society because this society have many different cultures or subcultures existing along each other. So it's a multicultural society because other cultures exist along each other within that society.
Okay, yeah.
There's multiculturalism, different cultures along each other. The multicultural society is a society that has the existence of different cultures alongside each other.
What's the difference?
The difference is that we're talking about multiculturalism is the atmosphere. But when it comes to multicultural society, it's a society, but the act is multiculturalism.
Ah, okay.
The act.
Yeah.
The act of having different cultures within a society is multiculturalism. But doing it in that society is a society with multicultural. Do you get it?
Yes.
So multiculturalism could be the adjective there.
The adjective.
Yeah. Do you get it?
Yes.
So we go to the criticisms now. What are the criticisms or problems about multiculturalism? Okay, so yeah, I wrote criticism on multiculturalism. It gives too many rights to minority. It might result into spending more than budgeted for. When other cultural society, when other cultures are practiced alongside, so that means you have given them, you've given them the authority to do that.
Yes.
As a result, you might have to provide for them too, as a country. Do you get what I'm saying? You don't get it. If Libya has allowed multiculturalism, if it is allowed. So that means different cultures can practice within the society.
Yes.
So if this is allowed, it means government should also make way for them. They have the same right as the majority culture.
Oh, yeah.
So that means you have to provide for them too. And that is an extra budget.
Yeah,
you get it? The second one, minority may stay too separate from the host community, making integration become difficult. Another problem about multiculturalism is that the minority group or the minority culture might focus on practicing their own culture. As a result, they won't be able to integrate to the majority culture. That means the Libyan culture is there.
Yeah.
But because we are allowed to practice our own culture, we might not care about the Libyan culture. That means we won't be able to integrate into the Libyan society, which is bad because we need to understand the Libyan society so that we can respect the Libyan society.
Yes.
So do you get the point there? Yeah. That's the second one. The third one, it is too idealistic as it is difficult for different cultures to exist along each other without conflict. It is difficult because we have differences. Due to cultural variance or cultural variation, there's going to be conflict. There's going to be disagreement. There are things I like, there are things you don't like. There are things I eat, there are things you don't eat. So because we have cultural variance, it will be difficult for multiculturalism to exist without conflict. Is it clear?
Yes.
The next one, it doesn't allow the host culture to provide a value system that holds the society together. So that means the host culture becomes one of the many cultures in the society. So the host culture, that's the majority culture, becomes the same as other cultures, because you won't have a value system. The Libyan culture is there, but because the Libyan environment or the Libyan government allows other culture, so Libyan culture itself will be like any other culture. So you are practicing your culture, we are practicing our culture. So it doesn't allow you to have a say. So your culture just be like the same culture like any other culture, which is not. And you are the host country, you are the host culture, but you now exist along each other. You now exist along each other culture. So you are just like any other culture. So it becomes optional.
Yes,
That's the criticism there. I think it's clear.
Yes.
So we go to ways to respond to multiculturalism. One, assimilation and integration. So that's how to respond to a cultural multiculturalism. The problems regarding multiculturalism.
Okay.
One, assimilation and integration. This takes place when other cultures gradually lose their identity and become part of the dominant culture. So assimilation means you start forgetting about your culture and start abiding with the rules. How do I put it? You start practicing the culture of the host country. That is assimilation and integration. So you forget about your culture, you start forgetting about your culture, you now start thinking about the host culture. That is assimilation and integration. Do you get it?
Yeah.
So different approaches used by countries towards assimilation. So, okay, so when we're still talking about assimilation here, so they can use citizenship test.
What?
They want to test citizenship test.
Citizenship, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so this approach ensures that people know about the host country's history and culture. So if you don't know it, we might not even give you the visa. Do you understand? So this is a way to let you understand what our practices is assimilation and integration. Two, community cohesion. This refers to making an attempt to integrate minority cultures by involving them in community programs. So though the Nigerians, the Chadians, the Egyptians around here, you start inviting them to programs to see how the practices of Libya is. That's another way to assimilate and integrate people.
Yes.
The third one, acting against the expression of some aspects of minority culture. So you don't, whatever they do, their attitude, their expression, how they portray their culture, you stop saying no to them. So by saying no to them, you want them to forget about their culture and start practicing the host culture. You don't get, we talk about assimilation and integration, which means you want them to forget about their culture.
Yes.
Wanting them to forget about their culture is by making a citizenship test.
Yes.
Two, community cohesion, inviting them to different programs.
Yes.
The third one is about going against their expression, how they express, how they practice their culture. You are going against it. If the host country start going against the culture, that means you don't have any other choice now to stop the culture, or you go back to your country. So it's either you start practicing or you go back to your country. So that's another way to assimilate and integrate.
Yes.
Is it clear?
Yeah. There's another one.
No, that's all I wrote.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're going to globalization.
Globalization.
We go to globalization and global culture. So for globalization, it involves the feeling that the world seems to be getting smaller because people and culture have more contacts and are more aware of each other. So globalization means that the world becomes so small that we feel.
Yes.
Okay, that we feel that the world is so small, that means so closer to us. Because of the contact we have. You are here and you could talk to someone in America. You are here, you could talk to someone in China. It's because of globalization. So that is about globalization. It means people are moving, technology is moving, resources are moving, money is moving from one place to another without any restriction. That is globalization.
Yeah.
So examples of globalization here, we talked about world information system, the internet, telecommunication, or satellite. That is an example of globalization.
Yes.
Global mass media, like films, television, we watch these things, they are global.
Yeah.
Global patterns of consumption and consumerism. That means we're talking about how people go on with their lifestyle and how they feel at home in different countries. I'm here. I'm not a Libyan, I'm a Nigerian, but I feel at home here. So that is called consumption and consumerism. So I could live my lifestyle, I could live my life here without any fear of like, no, this is not my home.
Yes,
It's
yes.
globalization. Note, the experience of globalization is in developing countries is more of economical than cultural. So when you talk about the experience of globalization,
Experience.
the experience of
Ah,
globalization
yeah.
in developing countries, it is more of economical than cultural. So that means Europeans go to Africa or developing countries not because they want to know their culture, it's because
Yeah,
they can
they
tap.
Kind of activities in this stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
the
get
point.
it.
I think it's clear.
Yeah.
So people in developing countries work hard for little compensation to supply the rich world. So in developing countries, people work hard there, but what do they get in return? They get cheap things in return, in reward.
Yes.
Do you understand the point there?
Yes.
Okay. So that takes us to westernization. Are you there?
Personalization.
Yeah, it's down.
Okay.
So for westernization, I go, this is the spread of American culture so that the flow of culture is all one way. So we call it westernization because they want us to start thinking about our culture in the way of American culture. So there's no other culture than the culture of America. So that is all called westernization. So one-way culture.
Yes.
Do you get westernization here?
Yes.
Okay. So what are the benefits of westernization? One, it spreads value about human rights. You know, America, they value human rights. So yeah, they value human rights. So
Yeah.
it's an advantage.
Yes.
Two, it encourages freedom. It encourages freedom.
Yes.
It supports gender equality.
Yes.
So this is what American culture is all about.
Mm.
So, but when you look at it in the other way around, it brings about cultural imperialism. That means we have to bend into what they do. The disadvantages about it is called cultural imperialism. Do you get it?
Okay. Yes.
So for cultural imperialism, this is when the rich countries dominate the world through their cultural influence. Instead of directly ruling as they did during the colonial era. So, you know, we said with westernization, which means we start thinking about, we spread American culture in a way that it flows all around the world. That is westernization.
Yes.
We talked about the benefit as it brings about freedom. It talks about freedom. It talks about gender equality. It talks about human rights.
Mm-hmm.
But when we start indirectly wanting to rule people, enforcing them to practice our culture.
Yes.
This is what forcing them to practice the American culture. This is what we call this is what we call cultural imperialism. So they don't do it directly, they do it indirectly.
Mm.
So the case of cultural imperialism now. This is when the Westerners, through their cultural exploit, through their culture, exploit developing countries. So it is cultural imperialism because Westerners, they go to developing countries, they instill their culture into them. Do you get it? The developing countries have their own culture, but because you want to help them, because you want to develop them, you start doing that by instilling your culture into them. So this is when Western cultures put an end to the local cultures which cannot survive against them. So that's another cultural imperialism. Do you get what I'm saying here?
Yes.
You know, we're talking about westernization. So the problem about westernization is cultural imperialism, where you have to force us to start practicing your culture as Westerners because you want to develop us. And the second one here is about forcing that culture into us to the extent that we cannot survive without your culture.
Mm.
You get, so our culture, they put an end to our culture because our culture cannot survive against their own culture. So we cannot even survive without practicing their culture. Do you get it? So they are exploiting us. So this takes us to the evidence for globalization as westernization. So here we want to talk about why people think globalization is westernization. Do you get it?
Yes.
So the first one, films produced in Hollywood are watched all over the world. This takes huge influence on people. So we watch American movies. So we don't think about other movies anymore. We think about America. Here we're talking about the evidence of globalization as westernization.
Yes.
So globalization shouldn't be westernization. That's the point.
Yeah.
Because globalization means we are seeing the world as one. That is globalization. We're seeing it as so closer to each other. That's globalization. But westernization comes in place because we think that globalization, they called it globalization because they just want to call it globalization. It is westernization. So whatever we do, whatever we practice is the American way. That is the case against globalization. So if the case is against globalization, it means globalization is westernization. But if the case is in support of globalization, that means globalization is not westernization. So here we're talking about globalization as westernization.
Yes.
Do you get it?
Yes.
So the case against globalization now. So the first one is a film produced in Hollywood movie are watched around the world.
Yes.
So they can influence us through their practices.
Yes.
The first one. The second one, most of the world's most successful music performers are Western or Europeans.
Yes.
That's another case against globalization. Globalization is westernization here.
Yes.
The third point, English has become a global language. Most web pages are in English. That is a case against globalization.
Yes.
As it is westernization. The next one, football originated in Europe and have become the world's most popular team sport. That is globalization.
Yes.
As westernization. Some Western foods have become a more popular globally, led by brands such as McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Yes.
So with the way we are all on this same line. McDonald's everywhere, chicken, KFC everywhere. So this is Western ideology. So you are telling us it's globalization because you are here. KFC is here. You call it globalization. It's not globalization, it is westernization.
Yes.
That's the point there.
Yes.
World news is supplied mainly by American companies, which tend to reflect American interests, like CNN, BBC. They are global. They are westernization.
Yes.
Do you get it? They are Western ideology. And the last one is most global tourism is by Western tourists to a destination that caters for them. So most tourism case are tourists are Europeans, Americans that exploit Africa. So they are going there for economical reasons to see what they could get.
Yep.
That is the case for globalization being westernization.
Yes.
Now, we want to talk about globalization, which is not westernization.
Against.
Yes. So the first one I wrote is other countries have film industries. Other countries have film industries, which is true. Other countries have film industries like Nigeria, they have Nollywood. Nigeria has Nollywood, India has Bollywood. So it is not only Hollywood. So Netflix, we watch Hollywood, we watch Nollywood, we watch other movies too.
Yes.
So it is not globalization, is not westernization.
Yes.
Do you get it?
Yes.
The second point here, Bob Marley wasn't an American and was the first superstar from a developing country, Jamaica. So you're talking about musical performance, musical stars are from America, but it is not. Bob Marley was able to make his name and is still relevant today.
Yes.
Do you get it? So that means globalization is not westernization. The third point, many people still value traditional styles of dress. So we don't put on only jeans. People put on jalabia, people put on there. So it's not about what America put on. We have our own, and we still value it.
Yes.
The fourth one, there are still thousands of languages. So it's not only English. Chinese is even closer to English.
Yes.
In terms of how they speak it. And most of websites are not only in language too, in English. So globalization is not westernization.
Yes.
And the last one, food from other parts of the world have become popular too. In the West, with many restaurants, even in America, there's Chinese restaurants, there's Japanese restaurants. So it's globalization allows Chinese food to be sold in America. Globalization allows Japanese food to be sold in America, Turkish food to be sold in America. So globalization is not westernization.
Yes.
Is it clear?
Yes.
So that's the case about globalization. And the last thing, the third to the last is about the football. They said football originated from the Western ideology. But Brazil won the highest World Cup. And Brazil is not considered that Brazil is a developing economy.
Yes.
So Brazil's ideology is not used there, but they won the most World Cup. So globalization is not westernization.
Yes.
News organizations from non-Western countries, such as Al Jazeera, are also popular.
Yes.
Globalization is not westernization. Pilgrimage such as Hajj in Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Millions of people go to Saudi.
Yes.
So it's not the only tourism. So it's not about American tourists here. Everybody, anyone could tour any country too. So globalization is not westernization.
Yes.
I think it's clear.
Yeah.
So that ends globalization and cultural diversity.